Hi, everyone, and welcome to ALEC TV. I'm Catherine Mortensen, and joining me today is Nino Marchese. He is the Director of Civil and Criminal Justice here at the American Legislative Exchange Council, otherwise known as ALEC. Thank you all for being with us today. And Nino, I'm very grateful to you joining us today because what we want to talk about is something that is really important. And we've been seeing this over the last few months play out with these trucker convoys, particularly the one up in Canada. And it is the chilling effect of these donor disclosure laws. And what are, first of all, I want to just ask you, what are donor disclosure laws and how do they relate to these stories that we all heard of in Canada, where individuals who had donated to the truckers up there in Canada were their names, their information, private details were being released and leaked to the media. So that's what we want to talk about. And so I'll just let you start, Nino, by explaining kind of what these disclosure laws are we're talking about and what the problems are and how they can have a chilling effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be talking about it. It's a really important issue. A lot of states are facing donor disclosure issues, and they're also passing a lot of protections to strengthen donor privacy. So donor disclosure at large is really laws that compel the disclosure of private individuals' informations, those who donate to certain nonprofit organizations or charities, and they're usually, forced with some greater interest that the state may or may not have. Sometimes they're politically motivated. And this most recent example with the Freedom Convoy up in Ottawa, Canada, there wasn't a law that was passed or anything like that. It was kind of done through, inappropriate access to donor information through the Give, Send, Go online charity facilitation. So there was somebody that hacked into that account that wanted to oust, the private information of those donors. And while those are two different examples of, a donor disclosure law that a state may pass and somebody hacking private information, the reason ALEC highlighted it in a recent blog post was to show kind of the same effects that happen in either circumstance. When those donors' informations were released, donors who contributed amounts as little as $40 or $50. There were journalists, legacy media, namely the Washington Post, who reached out to these donors. A lot of them were Americans, and asked for a statement. And it's kind of hard to believe that the motive behind that was anything less than to intimidate them and to make them think twice about the next time they want to contribute or support a cause voluntarily that other people may have an issue with. And this is the chilling effect that ALEC discusses on the issue, however it plays out, whether it's a state law that wants to pass, a law that a state legislature that wants to pass a law to force that donor identities be disclosed if certain organizations or individuals contribute to others, or even at the federal level, when ALEC filed its amicus brief and the AFP response case, one of the biggest points that we name is not only does this violate people's First Amendment rights, but it also has a chilling effect on people's First Amendment protected rights to freely assemble, associate, and speak how they so choose and support issues and beliefs and positions that they want to. So, the recent hacking of the Freedom Convoy, Give, Send, Go accounts, and the contacting of them by legacy media, mainstream media, just kind of shows how that plays out in the long term, how people's free speech can be chilled. Because I guarantee those donors who made those contributions, who were contacted by these journalists, are going to think twice. And that was probably the intention of the outreach that was made to them in the first place.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Nino. My father donated a few weeks ago. I mean, he mentioned that he had given, like you said, a very small amount, $30 or $25 to the truckers here in the United States. And my first reaction to him was, I said, Dad, you're now on somebody's list. They're going to be coming for you. So sort of jokingly, but I do think that a lot of people saw what happened in Canada, and it really it is a big concern, because the issue is we could be canceled, right? In this new world we live in, where sort of everything we do, somebody's monitoring, or we could be information leaked or hacked and put out there to the media. There really is a chilling effect. But then the separate thing, because as you pointed out, what happened in Canada was people got improper access. Hackers got into that database at the what's it called, the GoFundMe. But we also have issues here in the United States where certain states have laws that give third-party groups information to donors. Is that the problem here more in the United States?
Well, there's a couple of ways that donor disclosure can play out. It can be a very direct and blatant law that says any nonprofit organization that fits within these parameters that the state classifies must disclose the identities of their donors. That's the most, I'd say, extreme and direct example of those laws. That's what California Attorney General's office did, which prompted the Americans for Prosperity first Bonta case. Another way that it plays out is we see states taking up election or campaign finance reform. And there are obviously reporting requirements and reporting windows, what counts as political speech, and then what organizations would have to register as a political action committee. And sometimes those laws are rewritten in a way that are too broad to where they inadvertently, intentionally or not, rope in nonprofit organizations who are non-political and not working on elections or campaign finance or any of that. But still, the effect remains the same, that they would be required to disclose who their donors are. We recently saw that a bill that had that same effect up in the Idaho Senate, and it recently passed the Idaho Senate. It's in the Idaho House of Representatives now. But I'd say for the most part, these are concentrated and calculated efforts on part of organizations who do want to oust, the identities of the supporters of organizations who they don't ideologically agree with. And that's very dangerous. That's a very dangerous concept to free speech. I think this issue is not, bipartisan in nature. There were.
Or you're saying it is bipartisan?
No, a nonpartisan.
Oh, nonpartisan. Yeah, I got you. So it is nonpartisan. Yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah, there were several organizations. I think half a dozen to a dozen organizations that would, most people would consider to be left of center.
Yeah.
Who joined, more conservative organizations in filing amicus briefs for the AFP first Bonta case. There was a joint effort across the ideological spectrum where people recognize this is a First Amendment right under attack through mandating disclosure of donor identities. And you did mention that, people are facing potentially getting canceled or, negative effects on a certain charity or supporters and violation of rights at the ground level. And that's absolutely true, but it can also be dangerous in certain respects. I mean, once a list of supporters for an organization, especially something that may or may not be having to do with, politics and government or any other social issues, once the government compels that list be required, it's public record,
Right.
and anybody can find that information. I mean, there have been stories of organizations. I know there was somebody who fled from the Chinese Communist Party, opened his own nonprofit organization here in the States, in California, and then was subject to that California donor disclosure law. Some of his donors were relatives and friends and family from back home in China. And once that list was disclosed, I don't think he ever heard from, certain relatives or friends of his back in China again. So, I mean, that's really what we're talking about, compelling identities of those who may not want to be compelled, and, stifling voluntary contributions and prosperity for causes that, people want to help further, but they may not want their names held, to a record in doing so.
So, Nino, you identified that in Idaho, there is a bill that's moving through the House and the Senate there that is of concern because it would give government access, it sounds like, to some of the donors. Is that
right? Yeah, a Senate Bill 1367. It recently passed the Idaho Senate. It's being taken up in the House now. And I believe the engrossed version, it's an amended version that kind of addressed some of the concerns that different organizations had with it. I believe ALEC Action even sent a issue alert to educate legislators on the issues within it. But there are still some concerns in the bill, and it does what I was talking about earlier. It's an attempt at reforming campaign finance laws, and it takes a somewhat aggressive approach by expanding certain reporting requirement windows and threshold amounts so that it would inadvertently loop in organizations that would not be commonly considered to be political action committees or something of the like.
Gotcha. So then the next question is are other states looking at similar legislation, or is Idaho the only one, or are there a lot of other states who already have this kind of donor disclosure laws on the books?
As far as compelling donor disclosure,
yeah,
there's a number of states that I believe do compel certain disclosure directly. There are also a wide variety of states that have protections against these types of laws. But again, it's not as a clear cut of a policy as other law may be, just because there is such a variety of ways that organizations can be required to do so, whether it's just directly through donations reaching certain amounts and capping limits, through election law reform, or certain free speech regulations. So it's hard to pinpoint what states are doing great in the area, what states aren't, what states have the laws or don't, because there's a variety of ways that those privacy rights can be protected and also infringed on at the same time.
Okay, so I heard you say earlier that in the Idaho case, this it's being brought in under the term of campaign finance reform. Is that something that we should look for, or is state lawmakers should say, oh, wait, someone's introducing a campaign finance reform bill. Let's look closely into that, because that's a lot of times where they try to hide this.
Right. And I don't want to speak to the intentions of those members who brought up that bill. This is a common way that donor identities can be compelled to be disclosed. But without getting into the motives behind it, that is a common way that donor disclosure is compelled. So ultimately, I'd say if you're a state legislator, and you see a bill that's been sent to your committee or just been introduced and it wants to tackle campaign finance reform, that's great, and we should always look to uphold integrity in our election processes and hold those accountable in their electioneering standards. But we should also look to make sure that we're not roping in organizations and private individuals who wouldn't be normally considered to be part of those types of political entities. People do have a First Amendment right to organize and support who they want and be involved in their government, and we don't want to hinder that and burden that inappropriately.
Right, I gotcha. So ALEC, Nino, what are some of the policy solutions then? Does ALEC have model policy, model legislation on this issue, or is that something that our members are looking at? Where do we stand with solutions to this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an issue that ALEC has been handling for a while. We have a couple model policies that address this. One is our statement of principles on philanthropic freedom, where we talk about the importance of protecting donor privacy and what philanthropic freedom means. We have another resolution in support of nonprofit donor privacy, which kind of explains a little further of why it is so important to protect certain individuals' privacy rights, non-discriminatorily, but just in general. And we also have a donor disclosure legislative toolkit, which kind of gets into the last question you were talking about. What should state legislators look for? What type of bill should they look for where this issue may be hidden within? Or if it's not hidden, if it's more obvious, what types of effects should a law have or shouldn't have to accomplish the goal that you want. So that's a resource that we like to distribute to legislators to help them foster the best policy that we can.
Well, is there anything else that is important to bring up here that I haven't asked you about, Nino?
I think it's just framing this conversation in the right way. I mean, we hear the left talk a lot about dark money and money in politics and, shedding light on the powers that may be financially supporting different causes. And I just think that's the wrong way to frame this. When we talk about protecting donor privacy, we're talking about protecting people's First Amendment rights to free speech and to assemble with and associate with who they want and on their own terms. We already have laws that establish, what campaign finance is and regulations that require organizations to register or identify to keep that transparency in government. We have transparency laws within government to hold, elected officials accountable. But I think that we should be, cautious and hesitant to, ambitiously pass laws that could rope in too many people and too far. People should be able to donate privately to organizations they'd like to support if they want to, especially if those are other private organizations. And, that should be supported and protected for every individual and for every organization, regardless of, where they stand on the political spectrum, on the ideological spectrum. And I think it really needs to be reframed as a First Amendment protection discussion.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your expertise. And if people want to learn more, I would suggest ALEC.org. Or if you are a state lawmaker and you're a member of ALEC, you're certainly welcome to reach out to Nino directly for any resources that he can provide. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we will see you next time on an ALEC TV.
Thank you, Catherine.